A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. A sleepy summary. This is the story of a book called A New Earth, and underneath the story of the book is a much older story, the story of a mind that forgot itself and is slowly, gently remembering. Once upon a time, not so long ago and not so far away, a teacher named Eckhart Tolle sat down to explain something very simple and very difficult at once, that almost everyone alive is dreaming while awake. Not dreaming like a night dream with dragons and flying, but dreaming in a quieter way, carrying around a voice in the head that never really stops, a voice that comments and judges and worries and remembers and plans, a voice so constant that most people mistake it for themselves. You have heard this voice. You are hearing it now, perhaps, wondering what this sentence means, or thinking about your day, or noticing that your eyes are tired. That voice, Tolle says, is not you. It only feels like you because it has been running for so long, unquestioned, like a radio left on in another room for so many years, that the house has forgotten it could ever be quiet. He calls this voice, and the whole structure built around it, the ego. Not ego in the way we sometimes use the word to mean someone is arrogant or full of themselves, though that is one flavor of it, but ego in a much wider sense, a mental image of who you are, stitched together out of memories, opinions, roles, possessions, achievements, failures, grudges, and stories, all held together by one thin, constant thread of self-talk. The ego is not evil. It is not even really a thing, the way a chair is a thing. It is more like a mist that gathers when awareness forgets itself, a fog that rises out of unconsciousness and then insists that it is the only weather there has ever been. Let yourself sink a little further into the pillow, because here is the first slow truth the book wants to tell you. The ego survives by identifying with things. It is hungry in a strange, bottomless way, and everything it touches becomes a little piece of me or mine. Your car is not simply a car to the ego. It becomes an extension of who you are, so a small dent in the door can feel like a small wound in your very self. Your opinions are not simply opinions. They become flags planted in the ground of your identity, so that when someone disagrees with you, some part of you feels almost as though you are under attack, even though nothing about your actual body or actual life has changed. Your job title, your nationality, your political party, your favorite team, the brand of things you own, the causes you support, the ego can turn any of these into a mirror it uses to prop itself up and say, "See, I am real, I am someone, I matter." And because this hunger is never quite satisfied, because no possession or position ever finally fills it, the ego is always slightly restless, always looking toward the next thing that might complete it. More. That is the ego's favorite word, whispered under almost everything it does. More money, more recognition, more comfort, more certainty, more being right. Tolle spends a long, patient stretch of the book gently taking apart the many disguises the ego wears, the way you might unwrap layer after layer of tissue paper from a gift curious what is really inside. One disguise is the desire to be right. Have you ever noticed how good it can feel, in a small private way, to win an argument, even about something that barely matters? That little glow of satisfaction is not really about the facts of the argument. It is the ego briefly inflating itself, feeling more solid, more real, because I was right and you were wrong. Another disguise is complaining. It might seem like just talking about a problem, but often underneath, complaining is quietly saying, I am the one who sees clearly, I am the one who is wronged, I am justified. And being wronged, oddly enough, can become its own kind of identity, a story the ego tells about itself again and again, drawing a strange comfort from its own grievance. Yet another disguise is the drama of relationships, where two egos, each secretly convinced the other is the problem, act out old patterns of attack and defense, blame and counter-blame, each one certain that if only the other person would change, peace would finally arrive. Let your breathing slow down here, the way it does right before sleep, because this next part is important, and it is not meant to make you feel bad about any of it. Tolle is not scolding humanity. He is more like someone pointing gently at the water we have all been swimming in for so long that we forgot it was water at all. He says that this ego pattern is not a personal failing, but something almost like a stage in the growth of human consciousness, something nearly everyone inherits simply by being raised in families and cultures and histories that were themselves woven out of ego. Parents pass it to children the way a cold passes from one person to another, without ever meaning any harm, simply because it is what they know. Nations pass it to citizens through flags and anthems and old wounds kept alive as pride or grievance. Religions have sometimes passed it along too, ironically, even though many of their founders were pointing toward the exact opposite, towards surrender, humility, stillness, love beyond self-interest. Now, deeper in this drowsy story, Tolle introduces something he calls the pain body, and it is one of the most tender parts of the whole teaching, so let it come to you slowly. Imagine that every person carries within them an accumulated residue of old emotional pain, the hurt of childhood disappointments, old heartbreaks, humiliations, griefs, angers that were never fully felt and released, but instead stored away, the way old furniture gets stored in an attic, forgotten but still there, still taking up space. Tolle suggests that this residue does not simply sit passively. It behaves almost like a semi-independent entity, an energy field with its own kind of hunger. Most of the time it sleeps dormant, and you might go days or weeks without noticing it. But certain triggers, a certain tone of voice from someone you love, a particular kind of rejection, a small slight that reminds the body of an old wound, can wake the pain body up. And once awake, it wants to be fed. It feeds on more pain. It can take over a person's thoughts and words for minutes or hours, making them say things sharper and crueler than they would ever normally say, dragging up old grievances that have nothing to do with the argument at hand. Because in that moment, the pain body is not really interested in resolving anything. It is interested in more drama, more conflict, more of the very fuel that keeps it alive. If this sounds familiar, if you have ever watched yourself or someone you love say something in the heat of an argument that seemed to come from nowhere, seemed too big for the moment, too old, too raw, that Tolle would say gently, was likely the pain body speaking, not the person's truest self. And he suggests that entire families can share a pain body, passed down almost like an heirloom, and entire nations can carry a collective pain body too, a kind of stored grief and rage from wars, oppressions, and historical wounds, which can suddenly flare up in moments of collective conflict, seeming to possess whole crowds of otherwise gentle people. And here the story softens, the way a lullaby softens after its saddest verse. Tolle insists this pain body is not a life sentence. It cannot survive being truly seen. Its whole power depends on you being unconscious of it, mistaking its voice for your own voice, its anger for your anger, its sorrow for the whole truth of who you are. The moment you notice, this heaviness rising in me right now, this is the pain body, this is old pain surfacing, this is not the whole truth of this moment. In that noticing, something shifts. The pain body loses its grip a little. It cannot feed on awareness the way it feeds on unconscious reaction. Simply watching it without immediately becoming it, without immediately acting it out, begins ever so slowly to drain its old stored charge. Presence, Tolle says, is like light entering a dark room. It does not have to fight the darkness. It simply arrives, and the darkness, being nothing but absence, cannot remain where light is. Rest here a moment in that image. Light entering a room, nothing needing to be fought. This is one of the gentlest and most repeated teachings of the whole book. So let it wash over you again in different words, because sleepy stories are allowed to repeat themselves, the way waves repeat themselves on a shore. You do not have to war against your ego. You do not have to hate your pain body or shame yourself for having old wounds or force yourself into some perfect, permanently peaceful state. All that is asked, again and again, is a very small, very quiet act. Notice. Notice the voice in your head. Notice the tightening in your chest. Notice the old story trying to replay itself. That noticing is not another thought. It is something behind and beneath thought, something Tolle calls awareness or presence or simply being, the quiet, spacious sense of I am, prior to and beneath any story about who I am happens to be today. Let's slow down even more and talk about time, because time in this book turns out to be one of the ego's favorite hiding places. The ego, Tolle explains, lives almost entirely in psychological time, endlessly replaying the past, endlessly projecting into the future, rarely resting in the actual present moment, which is the only place life is ever really happening. Notice, he invites you gently that whenever you suffer, if you look closely, the suffering is almost always made of memory or anticipation. You are hurt about something that happened, which exists now only as a thought, a story, a memory replaying in the present. Or you are anxious about something that might happen, which exists now only as an imagined future, also just a thought, playing out in the present moment as worry. The actual present moment, this breath, this body sitting or lying here, these sounds in the room, is almost always simpler, quieter, and far more bearable than the mental stories laid over it. This does not mean the past never happened, or that the future never arrives, or that practical planning is somehow wrong. Tolle is careful, patient about this. Clock time, remembering an appointment, learning from a past mistake, planning tomorrow's schedule is useful and necessary. What causes suffering is psychological time, carrying identity in the past through resentment and regret, or carrying identity in an imagined future through anxiety and endless striving, so that the present moment becomes merely a hallway you are rushing through on your way to some better moment that never quite arrives. Because when it arrives, it too will only be now, and the mind will project its fulfillment onward again, forever a little further down the road. This is why Tolle notes almost sadly, so many people spend their whole lives waiting to begin truly living, waiting for the promotion, the relationship, the house, the retirement, and then discover that this now never actually shows up as a final destination, because now is not a destination at all. Now is the only place there has ever been. So he asks the reader to try something very simple, something you might try right now, in this sleepy moment. As your eyes grow heavier, feel your hands. Not think about your hands, but actually feel the subtle aliveness in them, the faint tingling, the warmth, the presence of them. In that small act, thought quiets, if only for a few seconds, because feeling the body directly and thinking endlessly are difficult to do at exactly the same time. This inner body awareness, as Tolle calls it, is one of the doorways into presence that does not require any belief system, any special training, nothing exotic at all, simply attention, turned gently toward the felt sense of being alive, right here, right now. Now deeper still into this slow story, we come to a distinction that runs like a quiet river beneath the whole book. The difference between form and the formless. Everything you can see, touch, name, and think about is form. Your body, your possessions, your job, your personality, your history, even your thoughts and emotions. All of it form, all of it temporary, all of it, in time, dissolving and changing the way clouds dissolve and change shape in the sky. But beneath all of this, Tolle says, there is something formless, an aware presence, a stillness, a sense of I am that does not change even as everything else changes, the way the sky itself does not change even though 1,000 different clouds pass through it. Most people, most of the time, are entirely identified with the clouds, entirely convinced that they are their body, their story, their possessions, their name, their history, and so every change in form feels like a threat to their very existence. Aging feels frightening, loss feels catastrophic, failure feels like annihilation. But when a person begins, even slightly, to sense that formless awareness beneath the clouds, something eases. Change can still happen, loss can still hurt, but it no longer feels like the end of everything, because some quieter part has recognized itself as the sky, not merely the cloud passing through it. This might be the closest the book comes to a spiritual claim, and Tolle offers it gently, almost as an invitation to notice something for yourself, rather than a doctrine to believe. He is careful throughout to keep this teaching close to direct experience rather than religious language, even while acknowledging that mystics and sages from many traditions, Buddhist, Christian, Sufi, Taoist, and others, have pointed toward this same formless awareness using 1,000 different names across 1,000 different centuries. Underneath all the different words, he suggests, is the same simple pointing, You are not only the story. You are also the quiet awareness in which the story appears. Let the story slow down even more here, like a lullaby reaching its softest verse, because now we come to what Tolle calls the flowering of human consciousness, the hope at the very center of a new earth. He looks honestly, without flinching, at the state of the world, the wars, the environmental destruction, the greed, the cruelty humans have shown one another across history. And he suggests that almost all of it, at its root, comes from this same unconscious identification with ego, multiplied across billions of people and magnified through history, technology, and power. When enough egos, driven by fear and the hunger for more, gain enough power over enough resources, the result is exactly the kind of large-scale suffering the news reports every day. But rather than ending in despair, the book turns toward a quiet, patient hope that humanity as a whole may be at the edge of a shift, waking up the way a single person can wake up, not all at once, not perfectly, but gradually, moment by moment, person by person, until enough individual awakenings begin to shift the whole shared field of human consciousness. He is careful not to promise some perfect utopia arriving on a fixed date. The shift he describes is more modest and more real than that, simply more and more people, here and there, all over the world, beginning to notice their own ego patterns, beginning to catch their own pain bodies before those pain bodies hijack a conversation, beginning to rest, even briefly, in presence rather than in constant mental noise. He suggests that suffering itself, paradoxically, can become a doorway to this awakening. Sometimes, he says, life brings a person to such a painful breaking point, the ego's structures collapsing under grief, illness, loss, or failure, that in that collapse something else has room to emerge, a quieter, more spacious awareness that was always there, underneath the noise, waiting. He speaks from his own experience here, describing a night in his own younger life when he was in such deep despair that his sense of self seemed to dissolve entirely, and out of that dissolving, unexpectedly, arose a profound and lasting peace. The discovery, in the depths of collapse, of that same formless presence he later spent his life trying to describe to others. Rest a while in that thought, if you like, because it is a comforting one for anyone who has ever gone through a hard season and wondered what it was for. Not every hardship needs to be redeemed this way, and Tolle would not want anyone to force meaning onto pain that simply hurts. But he does offer, gently, the possibility that even our darkest chapters are not necessarily wasted, that they can crack something open in us that easier times might never have reached. From here, the slow story turns towards something more practical. What does it actually look like, day to day, to live with a little more presence, a little less ego? Tolle offers what he calls 3 modalities of awakened doing, 3 simple ways that presence can flow into ordinary action in the world, so that a spiritual life does not have to mean withdrawing into a cave, but can instead mean bringing this quality of awareness right into the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. The first modality is acceptance. This does not mean passive resignation, giving up, or pretending everything is fine when it is not. It means something quieter and stronger, meeting whatever this moment actually contains: the traffic jam, the difficult conversation, the illness, the waiting, without inwardly fighting it, without the extra layer of mental resistance that says, "This should not be happening." The situation is what it is. Your resistance to it is a separate thing, an extra weight you add on top, and it is often that extra weight, more than the situation itself, that causes so much of the suffering. When you accept what is here, right now, even if you are also actively working to change it, something in you relaxes, and from that relaxed place, your actions tend to become clearer, wiser, and less driven by panic or resentment. The second modality is enjoyment. When a task does not require full acceptance, because there is genuine pleasure or aliveness available in it, Tolle invites bringing your full attention into that enjoyment, letting it be simple and complete, rather than always reaching past this moment towards some future reward. A walk can be enjoyed as a walk, not merely endured as exercise on the way to a better body someday. A meal can be tasted, not merely consumed while thinking about something else entirely. The third modality is enthusiasm, which Tolle describes almost like enjoyment with a forward motion to it, a creative energy that arises when you are working toward a goal but still remain rooted in the present process rather than obsessed only with the far-off destination. Enthusiasm, in this sense, feels alive, connected, energized, quite different from the anxious, grasping drive of the ego chasing more. One comes from fullness, the other comes from lack. Weaving through all three of these modalities is a single quiet thread. Whatever you do, do it as fully present as you can, and let that presence itself be the deeper point, more than whatever outer result you are hoping for. This leads Tolle into a distinction he considers essential: the difference between your outer purpose and your inner purpose. Outer purpose is whatever particular life you are living: your career, your role as a parent or friend, your goals, your projects, the specific shape your days take. Inner purpose, Tolle says, is the same for every single person on earth, no matter how different their outer lives look. To awaken, to bring presence into whatever you are doing, to let consciousness itself flow more fully into form. Two people can do the very same outward job, say, working behind a counter or raising children or running a company, and one can do it entirely unconsciously, driven by ego, anxiety, and the hunger for more, while the other does the very same outward tasks with presence, care, and quiet attention. And the difference, though invisible on the surface, changes everything about how that life is actually lived and felt from the inside. He suggests, gently, that a person's inner purpose always comes first, and that outer purpose, however important it might seem, works best when it grows out of that deeper presence rather than trying to substitute for it. Someone might spend their whole life chasing outer success, wealth, status, achievement, hoping that eventually enough outer success will finally deliver the peace they are really looking for, only to discover, sometimes only very late, that peace was never something outer circumstances could deliver in the first place, because peace was never missing from the present moment to begin with. It was only obscured by the mental noise laid over it. Let your breathing settle even more here, because this next part of the sleepy story turns toward relationships, one of the places, Tolle observes, where ego and pain bodies show themselves most vividly, and also where presence can do some of its most powerful healing work. He describes what he calls ego-based relationships with a kind of tender honesty, noting how often two people come together not out of real presence and love, but out of mutual need, each person hoping the other will complete something missing in themselves, each one unconsciously expecting the other to provide constant validation, security, or excitement. When this unspoken contract works, for a while, it can feel like love, even like magic. But because it is built on need rather than presence, it tends, over time, to reveal cracks, old pain bodies triggering each other, old childhood wounds reenacting themselves through a partner, disappointment arising whenever the other person fails to be the perfect mirror the ego was hoping for. Tolle does not despair over this. He simply names it clearly, so it can be seen rather than endlessly repeated unconsciously. He speaks of what he calls conscious relationships, which are not necessarily easier or more comfortable than unconscious ones. Sometimes, in fact, they surface even more old pain, because two people committed to presence will not simply avoid conflict by staying unconscious of it, but they are relationships in which both people are willing to notice their own reactive patterns rather than blaming the other person entirely, willing to ask, in a difficult moment, "What is arising in me right now? And is this truly about what is happening between us, or is some old pain body speaking through me?" A relationship held this way, he suggests, can become one of the most powerful spiritual practices available, because nothing exposes unconscious patterns quite as thoroughly as an intimate, ongoing relationship with another human being. Now the sleepy story widens outward, from the personal to the collective, because Tolle wants readers to see that everything true of individual egos is also true, in a larger and slower way, of collective egos, families, tribes, companies, religions, nations. A collective ego can form around almost any shared identity, we who belong to this group, as opposed to them who do not, and once formed, it tends to behave the same way an individual ego behaves, only louder and more dangerous, because it can command armies, industries, and mass movements. National pride can slide into nationalism. Group identity can slide into us versus them thinking. Religious devotion, meant originally to point beyond ego entirely, can itself become just another badge of identity, another way of saying we are right and they are wrong. Wars, persecutions, and large-scale cruelty throughout history, Tolle suggests, have so often been fueled less by any single evil person and more by ordinary people, caught up in a shared collective ego, doing things they would likely never have done as individuals standing alone, quietly in their own kitchens. And here the voice of the story softens again, the way it always circles back to hope. Tolle believes the same awakening available to individuals is slowly becoming available to humanity collectively. He points, gently and without overclaiming, towards small signs already visible in the world. More people questioning old patterns of greed and conflict, more people drawn toward practices of mindfulness and presence, more compassion crossing old boundaries of nation and tribe, more willingness, here and there, to notice a reactive pattern and pause before acting it out. He does not claim this shift is complete, or guaranteed, or even likely to happen quickly. He simply notes that it is possible, that it is already beginning in scattered, quiet ways, and that every single person who chooses presence over unconscious reaction adds, in some small but real way, to that larger shift. A new Earth, in this sense, is not a different planet arriving from somewhere else. It is simply this same Earth, seen and lived through a different quality of consciousness, less identified with ego, more rooted in presence, less driven by fear and lack, more grounded in a quiet sense of enough. Let the story slow down toward its close now, the way a lullaby always finds its way back to the beginning, because Tolle circles back again and again to the same essential invitation, this moment. Not some future moment when you have finally fixed yourself, finally achieved enough, finally become enlightened enough to qualify for peace, but this moment, exactly as it is, right now, however imperfect, however ordinary. He suggests that presence is not a special, rare, mystical achievement reserved for monks on mountaintops. It is available always right here, simply by turning attention away from the endless stream of mental commentary and toward the direct, felt sense of being alive. A breath, the weight of your body against the bed or the chair, the quiet hum of the room around you. In noticing these things directly, without needing to think about them, something in you rests, even if only for a few seconds at a time, and those few seconds, repeated again and again across a lifetime, are, in Tolle's telling, the entire path. He does not ask readers to become perfect, or to eliminate the ego completely, which he suggests may not even be fully possible for most people in an ordinary human life. He asks only for a shift in the balance, a little less unconscious identification with the voice in the head, a little more quiet awareness of it, a little less time spent lost in old grievances and future anxieties, a little more time resting in the simplicity of now, a little less feeding of old pain bodies through drama and reaction, a little more gentle noticing that lets old pains slowly dissolve in the light of attention. Small shifts, repeated patiently, are how a life changes, the same way small drops of water, repeated patiently, shape stone. Before this sleepy story finally settles all the way down, let it drift through a few more of the quiet rooms in this book, because there are still some soft corners worth wandering into. One of them is the difference Tolle draws between your life situation and your life. Your life situation is the outer story, where you live, what job you hold, who you are married to or not married to, how much money sits in your accounts, what happened to you yesterday, what might happen to you tomorrow. It is real and it matters, and Tolle never pretends otherwise. But he gently points out that your life situation is not the same as your life itself, which is this deeper aliveness happening right now in this breath, in this moment, underneath whatever the outer situation looks like. A person can have a very difficult life situation, illness, financial trouble, a painful relationship, and still, in this exact moment, feel the quiet fact of being alive, breathing, aware. And a person can have an apparently wonderful life situation, success, comfort, admiration, and still feel entirely disconnected from actual aliveness, because their mind is so busy managing the story that it never rests in the simple truth of now. So much suffering, Tolle suggests, comes from collapsing these two things together, from believing that your life situation is the whole of your life, so that any trouble in the situation feels like trouble in your very being. There is also, tucked into this book, a quiet teaching about surrender, and it is worth letting this word soften in your mind before sleep, because it so often gets mistaken for giving up. Surrender, in Tolle's sense, does not mean passivity, weakness, or accepting injustice without response. It means an inner yielding to what is here, right now, in this moment, even while you may be actively working outwardly to change it. You can surrender to the fact that it is raining while still deciding to bring an umbrella. You can surrender to the fact that a loved one is ill while still doing everything medically sensible to help them heal. Surrender is not about the outer action at all. It is about the inner stance you take toward this moment, fighting it, resisting it, wishing it were different in a way that adds suffering on top of suffering, or meeting it clearly, calmly, so that whatever action follows comes from clarity rather than panic. He notices that the moments we resist most fiercely are often the very moments that, once accepted inwardly, become strangely workable, even generative, in ways they could never be while we were still busy insisting they should not be happening. Let your thoughts wander, too, through Tolle's gentle teaching on death, since he does not shy away from it, even in a book meant to comfort. He suggests that so much human fear, restlessness, and grasping after more is underneath, a fear of death wearing many disguises, the fear of ending, of not mattering, of being forgotten, of the story simply stopping. And he offers quietly the same medicine he offers for every other kind of suffering, presence. Because the ego is built entirely out of form, out of a story that has a beginning and must someday have an end. It experiences death as the ultimate threat, the ultimate defeat. But the formless awareness underneath the ego, the quiet I am, that has been here changelessly, beneath every version of your life story you have ever told yourself, does not have a beginning or an end in that same way, because it was never made of form to begin with. Sensing this, even faintly, does not necessarily remove the sadness of loss or the practical grief of endings, but it can soften the terror underneath them, the way a nightlight in a dark room does not banish the dark, but makes it far less frightening to rest in. There is a tender passage, too, about nature, about animals, about flowers and trees and stones, which Tolle offers almost like a lullaby within the lullaby. He suggests that the natural world can be one of the simplest doorways back into presence, because a tree or a mountain or a sleeping cat is not caught up in psychological time the way the human mind is. A flower does not worry about yesterday's frost or tomorrow's drought while it is blooming. It simply blooms, entirely present, entirely itself, without comment, without story. When you sit quietly with a plant or watch an animal move without any self-consciousness at all, something in you can recognize that same quality faintly in yourself, the same simple aliveness beneath all your stories, briefly uncovered by watching something that has never needed a story in the first place. This is one reason, Tolle suggests, so many people feel an unexplainable peace on a quiet walk in the woods, or beside still water, or under a wide open sky. Nature does not add psychological time on top of the present moment, and simply being near that quality can gently remind the human mind how to do the same. And running underneath every single one of these small teachings, holding them all together the way a single low, quiet hum can hold together a whole lullaby, is the same repeated invitation the book keeps returning to patiently without ever seeming tired of saying it again. Watch the mind without becoming lost inside it. Notice thought without believing every thought is the truth. Notice old pain without feeding it further. Notice the ego's endless reaching for more, without shaming yourself for having an ego at all, since nearly everyone was handed one, unasked, simply by being born into a human family in a human culture, on a very old, very tired, very beautiful planet that is only just beginning, in its own slow time, to wake up a little. Every small moment of noticing, Tolle promises, gently again and again, is itself a tiny piece of that waking up, not someday, not once you have finally become a better version of yourself. But now, in this exact breath, however sleepy, however ordinary, however unfinished you still feel. And so the sleepy story comes gently to its rest, the way all good bedtime stories do, not with a dramatic ending, but with a soft return to stillness. A new earth does not promise that life will stop being difficult, that relationships will stop being complicated, that the world's problems will vanish overnight. What it offers instead is quieter and in its own way larger. The possibility that beneath all the noise of thought, beneath the old inherited patterns of ego and pain, there is already, right now, in you, a still, aware presence that was never actually broken, never actually lost, only ever forgotten for a while. The way the sky is never actually gone, even on the cloudiest day. All that is ever really asked, this slow story whispers, is to remember it, gently, again and again, one breath at a time, one now at a time, until remembering itself becomes less like an effort and more like simply, quietly coming home. Let your eyes close now if they have not already, and let that last image rest with you as you drift off. Not a lesson to memorize, not a task to complete, but a soft, familiar door always right here, always just this breath away, opening quietly onto the same wide, patient stillness that has been waiting under all your thinking the whole time. Sleep well, apt in the end. This sleepy summary, with its relaxing tone and warm glow, is not meant to replace something. It is meant to honor and point toward a much larger light. It is offered with care and with the genuine hope that something in tonight's listening finds its way into you as an invitation. The whole book is waiting. The real depth lives there, in every word they chose, and every story they told, and every quiet idea they let breathe across a full page. Let this be the beginning of something you carry forward in the light of an ordinary tomorrow. And if this lamp has helped you in some way, a light keeps it burning for someone else who might need it too.